every day you and I get bombarded with negative news. Just like the body becomes what we eat, the mind becomes what we're putting in. It is important to listen to stories that not only gives you hope, but also inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we're interviewing experts who will break down the solutions to the world's most pressing problems. And I promise you, if you listen to this podcast, you will not only stay informed, but you will also feel more energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Great.com is a philanthropic project where we're donating 100% of the profit towards the most effective cause areas. Right now we're focusing on climate change, like protecting the rainforests or funding climate change technology. And the best thing that you can do to help in that mission would be to subscribe to the channel. The topic of today is human rights of immigration, or immigrants. And to understand more about this, we invited Jessica Snyder from AI Justice, which stands for American for Immigration Justice. So I want to say welcome to Jessica to this interview.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me, Spirit.
It's a pleasure. So if we talk about the problem that you guys are trying to solve and that you see in the world, what would that be?
Yeah, so Americans for Immigrant Justice is a nonprofit law firm located in Miami, Florida. And basically what we do is we represent immigrants in various capacities. We have different programs, for example, like representing children that are unaccompanied, right, and that are in government custody, immigrant children in specific, immigrants that find themselves incarcerated or in detention centers. We work to litigate, right? So we go into the courts in order to try and enforce certain human rights violations. And we also work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So, and we work to help to keep families together through our family defense program. So we have a bunch of different programs. I specifically direct our detention program. So more specifically, what we do is we go into immigration detention centers and we provide Know Your Rights presentations, give people free legal advice, represent them in their immigration case, to try and basically get them out of the detention centers, and also try and find them a path to be able to stay in the United States if that's what they so desire. And we also monitor conditions in the detention facilities. And engage in a lot of different, published reports and sue the government, do all of those things.
All the fun things.
All the fun things.
If we would then go into a person who has been into detention or that you started an immigration process, if I understand correctly, American citizens, for instance, would get some kind of representative to do that process. But if you're an immigrant, you don't have that right. Is that correct?
That's correct. So all immigration laws are actually civil. They're civil laws. They're not criminal laws. So that is right that in the United States that let's say that if I was arrested for stealing something and I were to find myself in jail, usually I would get appointed a public defender because there is a right to counsel. There is a right to an attorney within the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, that's not the same within a civil context. So what that means is that if I'm an immigrant and I'm arrested because, the government says that I don't have papers or I don't have the right to be here, whatever the case is, I would end up oftentimes in a detention center, sometimes even actually like a literal jail. But because it's civil in nature and not criminal, even though it feels criminal-esque, right? I would not be afforded the right to an attorney. So that's what happens oftentimes is that the vast majority of immigrants that go through, kind of court proceedings or that are in detention centers face it alone. And unfortunately, most of them do not have attorneys.
Let's talk about that. You guys are helping to educate like children's, you're helping to educate people who don't have the knowledge about the legal systems and their rights. So if you don't get that help, What's it like to face this process yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very daunting. Um, you know, the reality is that immigration law is really complicated. It's complicated even for me, and I've been practicing, immigration law now for well over a decade, and I still get confused. Immigration law, they say for every rule, there's an exception. For every exception, there's a rule. So it's very complicated. They say that it's one of the most complicated areas of law, actually after tax law. So you can imagine, being from another country, maybe English is not your first language, or in the case of children, obviously, if you're a child and it's, if you're very young, you don't even maybe understand the concepts of what being in a court means, or what those consequences, might entail. And so it's very, very difficult to be able to, represent yourself, what we call like pro se. So representing yourself, by yourself without an attorney. There are some people that do it, but it's very difficult, particularly, any kind of application or anything that is submitted, any evidence that's submitted in court needs to be submitted in English. So if you don't speak the language, it's going to be really difficult for you to even fill out applications, for example, like an application for asylum to be able to remain in the United States, let alone make complex, nuanced arguments in order to be able to stay. So unfortunately, the system really is stacked against immigrants in many, many ways. And if you don't have a lawyer or somebody that's able to help guide you through the process and make those arguments and basically turn your story right into a way that's understandable and that fits under the law, which is a lot of what I think about when the work that we do, particularly when we're working with asylum seekers, then it's going to be really, really tough for you to be able to succeed on your case, unfortunately.
Right. What kind of education would you say that are there any basic education that you think is very vital when you teach, for example, a child? Is there anything that comes to mind that you could just share right now that people need to know about their rights?
I think when you talk about a child, it's a little bit different because it depends on what age the child is and how complicated things are. For example, I know our children's program, when we were dealing with a lot of the separated children, in the years under the Trump administration, unfortunately, when they were separating the children from their parents, we saw a lot of those separated children, and we actually created a coloring book that helped us to go through and explain who the judge was, who the prosecutor was, what certain things meant, in order to really make the child feel a bit more comfortable and to sort of understand the process, right? So that's when you're dealing with a child. For an adult, I think it's going to depend on the kind of case. Usually the kinds of things that we talk about are what somebody's rights are, that somebody has, you have the right to an attorney, even if, they're not given one, right, by the government, that you have a right to present evidence in your case. You have the right to examine any evidence, entered against you. You have the right to appeal your case if you don't agree with the judge's decision. We talk about, for example, for immigrants that are detained, how you might qualify to be released on some kind of, a bond. Right. So proving that you're not a flight risk or a danger to the community or those sorts of things. And then we go into individually, what can somebody expect when they're in court? What happens, who's in the courtroom? What are the different roles of the different people in the courtroom? What happens normally during the first, kinds of court hearings? What happens when the person has their actual big final court hearing before the judge? The different requirements for certain kinds of forms of relief or different ways that somebody gets to try and argue to stay in the United States. So like, for example, if I was meeting with a group of asylum seekers, I would talk to them about asylum law. I would talk to them about how they could go about proving those things and what kind of evidence they could submit. So it's going to depend based on who it is that we're talking to. But, usually what we try and do is we talk to people about their basic rights, and also the ways that they can, make arguments to be able to try and stay in the United States, since most people are members of our community and, tend to be living in the United States and then end up getting swept up in the immigration enforcement system.
It makes sense to understand that you are saying that children wouldn't even know the process, so you help them to understand, you see the process, and many adults don't even know that they have rights, so you help them to see those rights. You also spoke a little bit about the last 4 years under Trump administrations. We saw some kind of, in my worldview, absurd kind of things, that children and adults were separated when they came to the border. I guess things changed during the Trump administration. Has this impacted human rights in America for these immigrants the last 4 years?
Absolutely. And, I would say that probably immigration is one of the areas that has been the most affected by the Trump administration, because he made it clear from the very beginning that that was an issue that was very important. I think for us immigrant rights activists, it was a bit like our worst nightmare living through the Trump administration. I think it's pretty normal that through different administrations, people are going to take different positions or maybe do things to engage in certain policies that you don't agree with. But never, I think, have we had to deal with an administration that has just so callously really shown that they didn't care very much about human rights of immigrants, and in fact found that immigrants was engaging in very nativist and xenophobic even terms when they're talking about immigrants. And over the last 4 years in the Trump administration, the Trump administration actually did, unfortunately, a good job of going through little by little and chipping away at the due process that existed for immigrants, right? And that system was far from perfect even before Trump got into office, right? So I'm not trying to say that like everything was great and then Trump got into office and then everything was terrible. I think the system was already in a pretty not great place. And I think that the Trump administration really did absolutely everything that they could to make it difficult for immigrants, violating all kinds of, obligations under international human rights laws, for example, by shutting the border, by, engaging in programs where people, were not allowed into the United States to be able to make their asylum claims, and instead were forced to remain in Mexico and wait in Mexico, where they are essentially in, makeshift refugee camps, subject to all kinds of violence and human rights abuses and all those kinds of things. I mean, I think we saw, for example, even during, the coronavirus pandemic, which is something that is all of us have to deal with on an international level, right? Because it's a global phenomenon. And so to even see that the immigrants that were in detention, that we knew that they were at a very high risk once coronavirus would make it to those, what we call congregate settings, right? So it's like anything, like a jail or a detention center, just like a nursing home, one person gets it, it's very likely that it's going to be passed through, right? And so, as advocates, we were sounding the alarm bells and we were saying, hey, release these people, particularly the people that are older, that have medical vulnerabilities. And we even sued the government, right, to get them to release people, to get them to have conditions in the facilities that were, taking coronavirus into consideration. And even then, we didn't see the Trump administration move or the Trump administration, release folks from detention, despite the fact knowing that it was very likely that if they were to get sick with coronavirus, they could very well die. So I think the lack of humanity shown under the Trump administration was nothing less of shocking, honestly. I think it's still shocking. Obviously, I think we are so very grateful that, there's a new administration and that we have the opportunity as advocates to advocate with an administration that's actually open to listening to what we have to say. So very, very grateful for that opportunity, but certainly the Trump administration left human rights and particularly in regards to immigrants in a very bad place. And now, essentially, I think then the Biden administration is left to clean up a big mess.
Right. On the website, there's this term, not sure if it's still valid, but it said something about ice boxes. Is that another term for like the worst case scenario of detention? And how is it when people go into detention? What is that like, that experience?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is what in Spanish oftentimes we call a hielera, which translates into an ice box. And essentially what this is, it's actually just a holding cell, but they make the holding cell so cold that it feels like an actual ice box. And so oftentimes immigrants, when they come through the border regions, they get processed by Customs and Border Protection, CBP. And so they're placed in these holding cells, which honestly were really designed, only for you to be held in them for like 12 hours while they process some paperwork. And then they would transfer you to a detention center that is more equipped for you to actually be able to live, like where there are showers and, they give you a toothbrush and all these kinds of things, right? So those holding cells were really, when they were really built mostly for, it was mostly men that were going back and forth, migrant farm workers, usually from Mexico or Central America into the US. They really weren't built for what the migration that we're seeing now, which is a lot of humanitarian-based migration, for asylum seekers, children, families. And so what we're seeing is that with that system is that little kids, families, babies are often forced to stay in these ice boxes in these rooms. And I actually had the opportunity to tour some of them along the border. And I can say that, it looks like whatever kind of gross prison cell that is, concrete with concrete, floor, concrete bench. There are no beds. There's just, a toilet in the corner. There's no place to shower. So this is not a place where anybody should be staying for longer than a few hours, let alone like families or like mothers that are, breastfeeding, like small infants and those kinds of things. And so because of a lot of the humanitarian crisis that has occurred, particularly in the Central America region, where we see large amounts of migration, the government is not processing people fast enough. And so we see people being held in these ice boxes for days at a time. I mean, we even have individuals that we know of that have been in these places for up to a month, even longer. So you can imagine that it's a place that, not having a shower, not being able to brush your teeth, it's pretty bad conditions because, those ice boxes, right? Those holding cells were never designed to be able to actually detain somebody for a long period of time. And even when somebody is transferred into a facility where it is designed for them to be held for a longer period of time, they're still held in pretty bad conditions. It's very interesting. I mean, in the United States, we have a pretty, I would argue, bad track record of incarcerating people, meaning that the United States is the country that incarcerates the most people in the world, both per capita, per population, and the actual just amount of people that are currently in jails right now. Oftentimes that number is cited and it's actually just referring to our criminal justice system. And it's not even taking into account people that are being detained for immigration purposes, which is actually not being incarcerated for having committed any kind of a crime. You're just being held in what they call administrative detention. And so what happens is that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, there are very few facilities that they run themselves. And actually what they end up doing is they end up contracting out the dirty business of detaining immigrants. And so that looks like contracting out to private prison companies. So here in the United States, and I believe in other parts of the world as well, but particularly in the United States, there are actual corporations that what they do is they make profit off of incarcerating other people. So for example, the government will pay a certain amount of money per day per detained person to this private prison corporation to detain them. So there's a profit motive for more people to be detained. And there's also a profit motive, frankly, to cut corners in how the person is detained because, less money that you're spending is more money that you're making and putting in your pocket as a corporation. We also see that immigration contracts out to local county jails, right? So, oftentimes these jails are in rural communities that are kind of, more impoverished themselves. And so these communities look at immigration detention or had these contracts as a way to bring revenue into their community. But oftentimes they're very isolating, right? And the conditions are not great. So think of like a local, county jail. And so what you have is you have immigrants that are being held in administrative detention that are actually being held in literal jails in the same kinds of conditions. Oftentimes, sometimes with people, sometimes they're kind of segregated, and the people that are in immigration custody are in a different kind of housing unit, and sometimes they're not. And so oftentimes we see that immigrants are sometimes put into the same or worse conditions as people that are being held, for having committed a crime, right? So it's a really tough and often very punitive feeling system, right? Because even though somebody's not really serving any kind of a jail sentence, it oftentimes feels like it. And it feels, I think, probably psychologically even worse because, if I go to jail and if I'm convicted of a crime and a judge says sentences me to whatever it is, 6 months in jail. Okay, well, I know that I have those 6 months of time that I need to serve. But oftentimes with immigration detention, what happens is that people are held there an indeterminate amount of time, right? So it can be for, until they're deported. It can be for as long as they're fighting their case. And that could sometimes take months, sometimes even years. We have clients that have been in immigration detention years, but there's not an end date. So the psychological aspect of not knowing how long you're going to be detained, really, really has a horrible effect on people, rightfully so. And we've seen many of our clients that are, wonderful members of our society that are educated, that, do work and that, are in a good condition. And then after being, subjected to prolonged detention for, several months, really you see their mental health starts to deteriorate. You see that they no longer really want to fight their case. And I think that is all a bit kind of a part of the process, right? Is wearing people down in the system.
And we're also talking about probably exposed people from the start, people coming to America maybe as a last end or as an escape from something else, and then ending up in these conditions. Yeah, that's.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, as an advocate, like it is so heart-wrenching. I can tell you that I've talked to many people in detention, even people, for example, that were human rights lawyers themselves in other countries, that because they were human rights lawyers, they were, fleeing. And, if you read human rights law and, it says that you're supposed to present yourself when you go to the border and you're supposed to claim asylum. And, people don't realize that when that happens, that you're going to end up in a detention center or in a jail-like setting, or that you're going to be deprived of your liberty, right? And so there is a lot of disillusionment that I think that goes on because the US, I think in many parts of the world, is still seen as a beacon of hope, a beacon of democracy. That image may or may not have changed for some, I think, over the past 4 years, but nonetheless, it is an image that people hold, right? And we have certainly that culture of being a nation of immigrants and the Statue of Liberty, holding the torch and all these kinds of things, right? And so, but when people arrive and they don't receive that welcome that they thought that they would, when their human rights abuses are really, trampled on in many cases, when they're being held in jail-like conditions where they don't have access to, adequate medical care, mental health care, even basic, sanitation and hygiene sometimes, depending on the facility, to see that disillusionment, I think it's tough. It's tough for me to see, and I can only even imagine what it's like to actually, live that experience. That, like you said, for many folks, they have risked their life, every single, cent that they even have, to even be able to get to the U.S., to have the opportunity to seek asylum and to have safe refuge, and then to find that is not often the case and that they're not received, particularly, in the past 4 years. I mean, even under the Trump administration, you wouldn't even have been received into the United States if you presented yourself at the border. And towards the end, the border is shut, it's closed. It even still remains closed because of coronavirus. So yeah, it's a tough situation for a lot of people. But I will say that I am continually amazed by our clients and by the people that I have had the privilege to meet in these detention centers. They've really taught me so much about the resiliency of just humanity and a human being, and how much we will do and what we will go through to protect ourselves, our families, and also what we'll do and what we'll go through to, kind of defend the human rights work that we do, because we see many people that, defend human rights, or, were the opposition, political opposition in the country that they come from. And it's because of that, they've taken a risk, a personal risk, where it's just no longer safe for them to be able to remain in their country. And that's why they flee.
Jessica, we are going towards the end here, and I would like to give you the opportunity to both. Is there anything that you kind of want support from people in this cause? What would you like for people to do after hearing this interview?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, of course, there's always a thing that if you're so inclined, you can always go to, our website at aijustice.org, Americans for Immigrant Justice, take a look at what we do. And if you like, you can always donate, to our organization. Certainly that money goes towards, basically, my salary, the salary of the attorneys that I work with and the paralegals. And what we do is we go in on the ground and we're providing people with those crucial legal services, because if oftentimes if we weren't there, there would be nobody else there to advise the immigrants that are particularly in detention, or to, for example, to help those kids that were separated, So I do believe that the work that we do is very crucial. And, for those that I would say, if monetarily, you can't donate, I would say, start paying attention. Start paying attention because what is happening to immigrants in this country is really a travesty. Start paying attention to, particularly if you're in the United States, where your tax dollars are going. We spend a lot of money detaining immigrants that are not a threat to us at all. And there are many other ways, for example, to make sure that somebody, for example, is going to show up to their immigration court case. There are many different alternative to detention programs that exist. We don't actually have to detain people. So I would say to get involved and to make your voice heard. And follow us on, social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. And whenever we have, kind of a cause, whether it's a petition or some way that you could speak out or you can help, we post a lot of our information there. So follow us for the different campaigns, because there's always something going on. But I would say, wake up and pay attention to what's happening, because, we talk the talk as the United States, right? As a country of, human rights. Whether or not we're walking the walk, I think is really yet to be seen. I know we haven't been, but I think that we can. So we're happy for you to join us if you're interested.
If you would leave this interview with the last message, what would that be?
To never give up hope, to never give up hope. I think, it's difficult having, been witness to so many human rights abuses over the years, that it comes to a certain point where, you might feel like you're a cog in a machine trying to make a difference, and that it's really tough, And I think the past 4 years really illustrated that even more. But I think, it's a new moment. It's a new day. And I think that when there's a will, there's a way. And I know that for sure that if all of the brave, men, women, and children that have, fled to the United States and have contributed to our communities, if they haven't given up hope, and if they can do it, then I know that we can as well. So even though the situation is complicated or complex or might seem dire, I think that there's always a new way, a new energy, a new perspective that you can bring to things. So whatever that cause is for you, I'm speaking just more in general, I would say, whatever lights up your heart, right? Whether it's immigration or not, to not give up hope and to keep on plugging along. Because what we need more in this world are people that are, inspired and are, doing the work that's in their heart.
Jessica, I feel very inspired by the work that you're doing, and I highly respect this work. So thank you very much for taking the time, clarifying, and just allowing us to take part of the passion that you feel into this cause.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak with you and all of your viewers and audience.